The Buccaneers have started adding some really intriguing names to their coaching staff. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'd like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. The rumor mill is heating up about Mike Evans leaving the Buccaneers, and we talk about some realistic options for the Buccaneers in free agency. But we are going to start today off with some new coaching hires that the Bucs made on Thursday, starting with two names that we already knew were likely. So TJ Yates and Ken Zampese have joined Robinson's offensive staff after spending time with him in Atlanta. Yates was the quarterback's coach in Atlanta in 2024, then the passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach in 2025. Zampese was a senior offensive assistant in Atlanta. Neither one has had their roles officially announced as of yet, but we know there's a quarterback's coach vacancy as well as passing game coordinator after the firing of Kefensi Hinson on Thursday. So these guys could be filling those same roles in Tampa that they did in Atlanta, with Yates as the pass game coordinator and Zampese in the senior assistant role. But that is not official as of right now. It seems unlikely, though, that Yates will be the quarterback's coach. The Buccaneers have begun interviewing guys for that role, including Chandler Whitmer, who was the co-offensive coordinator for the national champion Indiana Hoosiers and worked with Robinson in Atlanta in 2024. The Bucs are also hiring Oklahoma State offensive line coach Andrew Mitchell for the assistant role in Tampa. This is the replacement for Brian Picucci, who left to join Liam Cohen in Jacksonville. Kevin Carberry is still the offensive line coach. Mitchell will be the assistant offensive line coach along with them. But then we get to an interesting one, and that is that the Bucs have hired former Buffalo Bills defensive line coach Marcus West as their defensive line coach. This comes on the heels of the Bucs reaching out to former Bills head coach Sean McDermott about joining Bull staff this season. More on that in just a minute. But West has been the D-line coach in Buffalo for the last 2 years, but had been with the team for the last 4, first serving as the assistant defensive line coach. West is only 42 years old, but the Bills were top 10 in defense for 3 of West's 4 years in Buffalo. This is a guy that has been around an incredibly successful team and a solid defense for the entirety of his NFL career. Before joining the Bills, West was the assistant head coach, co-defensive coordinator, and defensive line coach at Charlotte. He was also a defensive line pass rush specialist at Minnesota, assistant head coach, co-defensive coordinator, and defensive line coach at Austin, PA, and then defensive line coach at Chattanooga. He got his start in coaching back in 2008 as the defensive line coach at Wartburg. What's really interesting about this is the connection with the Bills, because of the fact that the Bucs did reach out to Sean McDermott. Now, that could be sheer coincidence. West became available. The Bucs felt it was an upgrade. They needed a defensive line coach. Absolutely within the realm of possibility that this just happened to be a guy that they really liked, who happened to be on Sean McDermott's staff. I don't think the Bucs reached out to McDermott to get him on the staff with plans of moving on to him as the head coach next season. I've seen that floated around. We talked about it on the squad show. If that was their intent, that is a pretty bold move to have Bowles hiring his own replacement and make him an advisor or an assistant or whatever position he was going to be given. I think that situation was truly a matter of seeing someone out there that could come in and help the football team. He has years of experience. He could bring a fresh perspective, some fresh ideas to the table that Bowles could have incorporated into what the Bucs were doing defensively. That to me makes the most sense. Remember, Bowles has to sign off on any addition to his staff. So this isn't Jason Light or ownership going over his head to bring in a coach that is supposed to take over or to, push Bowles a little bit more or make him feel nervous or feel the pressure. If that was the case, they would have just fired Bowles and hired McDermott. So McDermott and Light overlapped with one another with the Philadelphia Eagles. There is a history there between the two of them, but this was a move that I think that they tried to make strictly for the overall improvement of the team and more specifically the defense. Now, if you want a tinfoil hat theory, I have plenty, and I can give you one as it relates to McDermott and the Bucs. McDermott interviewed with the Bucs in 2016 for their head coaching job after Lovie Smith was fired. Now, that was when Dirk Cutter was promoted. So that could have just simply been the Bucs going through the process because the Glazers wanted to promote Dirk Cutter and have that continuity between Cutter and Jameis Winston. But they showed interest before McDermott joined the Bills as their head coach. Then you see all the success he had in Buffalo. Now we also see the incompetence that he was dealing with in the front office with a moron of a general manager who places blame on a coach for the same things that he took credit for when they happened. That's neither here nor there. That's for Locked On Bills to talk about. But this could have been a way for the Bucs to reach out and simply just say, hey, we liked you then. We still like you now. Maybe keep us in mind if you want to continue coaching this year in a smaller role. And then if we move on from Todd or he retires, we want to make sure that we stay fresh in your mind. While that is a little bit of a stretch, and I do think it's far more likely that they were just looking to improve the team and bring in a very smart and talented coach, it could have been a very calculated and intentional move to begin speaking with him now as they have their eyes on 2027 and beyond. Bowles is 62 years old. McDermott is 51. Bowles probably won't be coaching much longer, regardless of whether that's by choice or by force. McDermott could be the guy to lead a franchise, maybe the Bucs, for the next decade or more. One of the things that these franchises tend to do is plan for not just the upcoming season, but also look 3, 4, 5 years down the road and map out a plan to stay competitive beyond one season. You have to map out the financials. You have to map out, the players. You have to look at which players you have under contract that are going to be with you down, that far down the line. You're going to look at free agents that you might want to bring in to be part of that new wave and that new era. This could be a sign that future is rapidly approaching for the Buccaneers. Again, maybe that's by decision for Todd Bowles. Maybe it's by force. That's really going to hinge on how the Bucs do in 2026. But I don't think the plan in reaching out to Sean McDermott was to bring him in with the idea that you are bringing him in to replace Todd Bowles. You're not adding him to the staff saying this is the guy that we're going to replace Todd Bowles with. Because if you do that, if you put yourself in that situation where you say, we're going to bring in Sean McDermott, he's going to be a senior defensive analyst and assistant head coach, with him becoming our future, you have now undermined the head coach that you currently have. That's going to cause problems within the coaching staff. It's going to cause problems within the locker room, because if players don't, agree with what you're doing, or they don't like the direction things are going, that's when you start to form sides, or when you start to try to form mutinies to force out one guy and let another one in. That's not what you want to do. You don't want Todd Bowles talking to his new defensive line coach, and then that defensive line coach saying, why am I going to listen to you? I got my old head coach and the future head coach of this team right over here. I'm going to go listen to him. That is a toxic situation. So while people may want to believe that was the plan, where if the Bucs lose 4 games in a row in the middle of the season, you can fire Todd Bowles and you have your head coach in waiting right there. That's not how teams operate, because you will cause more problems doing that than you will solve. Because again, you are undermining the authority of the head coach. That is the boss. When it comes to the coaching staff, when it comes to the players, that is the boss, which is why I think it's completely wild that some moron talking head decided that Shedeur Sanders shouldn't listen to Todd Monken, because what has Todd Monken ever done in the NFL? If you're listening to that guy, stop. He's an idiot. But you don't want to set your team up in that kind of situation, because all it does is create an environment of hostility, of unrest, of uncertainty, and eventually toxicity. People are freaking out over a report that came out regarding Mike Evans, and you shouldn't. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Let's be real. Managing your finances can feel overwhelming. Between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. The automatic transaction categorization is a game changer. I can finally see exactly where my money is going each month, and it has helped me cancel some subscriptions that I completely forgot about. You can set budgets and goals, get personalized insights, and receive real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, and low balances. It even consolidates your checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard so you get a very clear view of your entire financial picture. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/locked-on. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. I have been a dedicated TurboTax user from the time I started doing my own taxes nearly 20 years ago. And I've stayed with them because of how easy they make everything, and because they ensure I never miss out with their expert help. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, check out the Everydayer Club. We've been getting a couple of new all-access members. I appreciate each and every one of you. You get ad-free episodes. You get exclusive perks. Again, I dropped that all 22, hour-plus long film review, taking a look at Zach Robinson's offense in Atlanta. You can check all of that out. Click the link in the show notes. All right, everyone. Deep breath, woosah, whatever you need to do. In with the good, out with the bad. If you were on social media at all, basically over the last 24 hours, you have seen Bucs fans starting to lose their minds over a report regarding Mike Evans. It comes from Tony Pauline, and if you're saying, who is that? I said the same thing. Pauline writes for Essentially Sports as a senior draft analyst. He's been in the business for over 2 decades. And yeah, he's got 40+ thousand followers on Twitter. But I'll be honest, I have followed football for the vast majority of my life, and this is the first time I remember ever having heard his name. Anyway, he dropped a column about things that he's hearing, excuse me, at the Senior Bowl, and that happened to include Mike Evans' future. Pauline said, quote, On the other end is Mike Evans, the 12-year veteran who has spent his entire career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 31 years of age, Evans has struggled with injury in the past 2 seasons and played just 8 games last year, catching 30 passes. Those I've spoken with over the past week believe it's less than 50-50 the veteran wideout re-signs with Tampa and that his career with the Buccaneers is likely finished. He'd like to go to a contender and win another title. I figured the New England Patriots would be a good fit, as Evans would be the final piece for their offense. Yet people in the know believe the Buffalo Bills are the team likely to target the former All-Pro. End quote. This is all allegedly being said, as Pauline calls it, in the back channels at the Senior Bowl. Now, I'm going to start all this off by saying, you know who else is there talking in those back channels at the Senior Bowl? The entire staff of Pewter Report, as well as your friend and mine, David Harrison. So if David had heard this, and I'm not saying that just because he hasn't doesn't mean that it wasn't said, but if David had heard about this, he would have told me. You know, if any of the Pewter Report guys had heard it, they would have said something about it by now. Instead, their article about it up on pewterreport.com references this same report from Tony Pauline. That said, people that are reliable when it comes to the Bucs are speaking out about it. Stroud said that Evans hasn't made a decision yet, and Jenna Lane tweeted this, quote, regarding Mike Evans, those close to him who I have spoken with today say he hasn't talked about his immediate future. He hasn't talked to the team about this either. None of those conversations have happened. I talked to him right after the season ended, and he said he'd start thinking about things after the Super Bowl. I asked if he had a timeline in mind, and he said 1 to 2 months after the season. But he was pretty clear on it being after the Super Bowl when he'd start assessing his future, end quote. This to me screams clickbait and attention seeking. He said that from the people that he's spoken to, it's a less than 50-50 chance. Well, number one, who have you spoken to? And just as important, how many people have you spoken to? If he spoke to 3 guys and 2 of them say that they think he's done being a Buccaneer, then yeah, that's less than 50-50, isn't it? If he spoke to 5 guys and 3 of them said that they think he's done being a Buccaneer, then yeah, that's less than 50-50. If he's talked to over a dozen GMs and a handful of front office people and a couple of coaches, that's a different story. I'm not going to clown the guy for citing sources. That's how this works. You get intel under the guise of anonymity. That's just basic protocol. So I'm not going to come on here and scream for him to reveal who he talked to or say that he needs to name names, because I know the importance of those relationships. I know the importance of somebody being willing to tell you information because they trust you with it. At the same time, this is at best pure speculation on the parts of the people that are not connected to the Bucs or to Evans directly. Evans is a man of his word. If he said he's not going to start evaluating his situation or his future until after the Super Bowl, then there's no information that these guys have that they could have been told by Evans, himself or Evans' agent or anything else that they could have passed on to Pauline. It is 100% pure speculation. If Evans does move on, it will break the hearts of Bucs fans, period. It will. There's no question. After his last free agency scare in choosing Tampa, we all kind of felt like he was a lifer. I still think that's going to be the case. I don't think that he's moving on. And I think the Bills hurt themselves by letting Bean open his mouth and prove what a dirtbag he is. That showed players across the league, especially wide receivers, that he will throw you under the bus as fast as humanly possible if he thinks it's going to make himself look good. Patriots, sure. Maybe, I guess. The thing is, the Bucs team is loaded with talent. His streak is over, so that isn't at the forefront of his mind anymore. He knows how talented this wide receiver group is. He's done nothing but gush over Baker and their relationship on and off the field. So the only way that I see him leaving is if he doesn't want to play for Bowles, or he doesn't think that Robinson was the right hire and doesn't like the way that he's going to fit in this offense. I keep going back to the reports last time about his wife not wanting to move and uproot their kids because she believed that Tampa was their home. She felt that was where she wanted to be and raise their kids and all of that. As far as we know, that's just as true now as it was then. For now, I would take this report with a grain of salt. Nothing is imminent. Nothing is confirmed or corroborated. It is pure speculation from the Senior Bowl, where a couple of guys may have been saying that they think Evans leaves for one reason or another, but mostly they may have just been trying to speak it into existence. We got a question about some realistic options in free agency, and we're going to start throwing out some names. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. If you've ever hired someone who looks good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, and they boost your profile or boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs with the fans. I've taken my son to numerous Celtics games over the last couple of seasons, and Game Time is where I always go to grab our tickets. We've been to Gainbridge Fieldhouse. We've been to TD Garden. We've landed some incredible seats for even better deals. I love the all-in pricing, so there's no surprises when I get to checkout. Just pick the tickets, head to checkout, lock them in with Apple Pay. It doesn't get any easier than that. One of the best things is seeing ticket prices drop the closer you get to tip-off. That's where you can really score some unimaginable deals. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, and I had a question sent in about realistic free agents the Bucs could target at linebacker and edge rusher. Now, I'll preface everything by saying I think Trey Hendrickson is absolutely realistic. And the biggest thing is that no matter what, the Bucs are going to have to do some salary cap gymnastics and work on some restructures to free up more cap space. That's whether they're going after a big fish like Hendrickson or Crosby or not. They have to have more money for this offseason. All that said, when you look at the market for edge rushers, there isn't a lot there that could be considered anything long-term. Most of the most productive guys are on the back ends of their careers, and while they'll be expensive, you're looking at a rental situation. Hendrickson himself just turned 31 and has an injury history. Then you have Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Dante Fowler. As far as the younger guys, they aren't super productive. Yetur Gross-Matos, Malcolm Kuntz, Cameron Sample, Josh Paschal. The only ones that bring you youth and high levels of production are going to be Odafe Owe and Kwity Paye. Both of those guys are going to cost you north of $20 million a year. So I think the most realistic scenario for the Bucs is going to be a short-term deal with Hendrickson, Mack, or Fowler to be that bridge to whoever you draft this year. Fowler had a tough year last season, but he was in Dallas and their defense was like the most god-awful thing that we have witnessed outside of the Cincinnati Bengals the last 2 years. But he just had double-digit sacks in 2024 for the Commanders. So if it's 1 or 2 years, you're going to get some solid production out of him. You know, it's when you take a look at the free agent landscape versus the needs of the Buccaneers, it's the linebackers where you can really find some legitimate help on the market. I mentioned a couple of times the idea of signing Nakobe Dean. I think he's a perfect fit in this defense, and he can elevate their production instantly. But some other realistic options would be Matt Milano. He's going to be 31, but he's still highly productive. You have Alex Anzalone from Detroit, who is always a nightmare to go up against. Again, a little older, but highly productive. And I know a lot of people out there want Devin Lloyd. I'm not going to rule it out completely, but he's going to be well north of $20 million a year. And I just don't think that you can justify that much money for an off-ball linebacker, especially with the Bucs' current needs and current cap situation. If you're going to go out there and get an edge rusher like Max Crosby in a trade or Trey Hendrickson in free agency, you can't also turn around and pay an off-ball linebacker the same amount of money that your edge rusher is going to be getting. Quay Walker, to me, is the most intriguing name outside of Nakobe Dean. He's young. He's been really, really good in Green Bay, and he's going to be affordable in the grand scheme of things. You're looking at probably high 12s to $14 million a year. You know, that's a deal that you can do for 4 or 5 years. You know, give him a big signing bonus. It's prorated so that the cap doesn't kill you this season. And then, you know, it starts to come in a little ways down the line. Nakobe Dean is kind of the same way. He'll probably cost just a little bit less than Walker, but he's an instant impact kind of player. He's coming from a really good disciplined defense in Philadelphia, and he can do anything that Bowles asks of him in this defense. That's why he's at the top of my list, because he fits this scheme. Now, Quay Walker is a close second to me, but I feel like in my brain, I think Quay Walker is the more talented player. But I also kind of bump him down because I need to wait and see if the Packers are going to make a push to keep him. There is every chance in the world that the Packers don't even let him hit free agency. Now, ultimately, that's on Quay. If he wants to test the market to see what his value is, and maybe he's just going to try to get more money from the Packers, or he really is ready to move on, that's on him. We have yet to see that. But I think it's more likely that Nakobe Dean hits the market and can land in Tampa Bay than Quay Walker. But those are for sure my top 2 guys. If you're not getting Levante back, and I will talk about the Levante David interview on tomorrow's show, so don't worry about it. If you're not getting Levante back, you have to find 2 starting linebackers. Pairing a rookie with either one of those guys, Dean or Walker, that is ideal. That will give you a duo for the next 4 or 5 years. Now, pairing a rookie with a veteran like Milano or Anzalone, that's great. That is absolutely fantastic. It's going to help their development. It's going to help them adapt to the NFL game, but you won't have that duo as long as you would have a rookie with Walker or Dean. Ultimately, I expect the Bucs to be busy in free agency. They're not going to be in the mix for those big name guys outside of potentially Hendrickson or in the Crosby talks, but they're also not going to be in a situation where they can bargain shop again. They know they have to spend money. They know they have to get proven talent, not just take chances on upside with guys. You know, and you know what? Maybe Jason Light has already called John Spytek to ask what the starting price is going to be for Max Crosby, and they're already looking into other options because the price is just going to be too steep. But knowing how close those two are, knowing the Bucs need an edge rusher, knowing that Crosby isn't happy there, I can promise you that if that call hasn't been made yet, it will be. Maybe that call just happens to be an in-person one when they're together at the scouting combine in Indianapolis here in a couple of weeks. You know, maybe the Raiders are waiting to reevaluate once they have a head coach. Maybe Max Crosby is waiting to reevaluate once he has a head coach. It sounds like it's going to be Clint Kubiak, which means having the top pick for Mendoza, and then you get the 15th pick for a guy like, Mekhi Lemon, the wide receiver out of USC, to pair him with your number 1 pick, and then that can be your quarterback wide receiver duo for the next who knows how long. That can be a pretty enticing offer for an offensive-minded coach. It's going to cost Vegas $5 million in dead cap to trade him, but it saves them $30 million in cap space for this season. It'll all boil down to whether or not Vegas is willing to move him, or if Crosby changes his mind based on those coaching decisions. As we get closer to free agency, I'll start to go more in depth into some of these options. But I did want to throw some names out there to answer the question that was posed to me about a week and a half ago. And I wanted to wait until we got through kind of all the offensive coordinator madness. But I want to also start preparing all of you for names that you'll be hearing more about as we get closer to that new league year and the negotiating window. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Subscribe on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Become an all-access member. Join the Everydayer Club. Lots of perks. I went through them earlier. Click the link in the show notes. Go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com, and you can check it all out there. Like I mentioned, we're going to get into that Levante David conversation with Kay Adams coming up on tomorrow's show. And if you want to support the show, but you don't want to join the Everydayer Club, it's real simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.